We live in an age that's characterized by fake news and alternative facts. It may be true for you, but it's not true for me. It's taken by many people as an obvious way to dismiss ideas that they simply don't like. But how did we end up here? In the early 1900s, Ferdinand de Saussure was a professor at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. His innovative lectures on linguistics and language science attracted a great deal of attention. He never published his theories during his short lifetime, but after his death, his former students got together to publish his ideas in book form based on the professor's lecture notes. The book was called Cours de linguistique générale, a course in general linguistics. Among other things, de Saussure developed the idea that language consists of many signs. To simplify things, we could say that a sign is more or less the same thing as a word. Now, a sign consists of two parts, the signifier and the signified. The signifier is the word that means something, and the signified is what that word means. We can talk about rain. The signifier is the actual word rain itself, but the signified is the phenomenon that the word refers to, that is, water falling down from the sky. Saussure believed that there is no inherent connection between the signifier and the signified. It is completely arbitrary. In English we say, it's raining, but in Swedish we say, det regnar. In French, il pleut, and in Italian, piove. In all these examples, we have different signs. The signifier changes according to the language, but the signified remains the same. The connection between the signifier and the signified is completely arbitrary. It is the different language groups that attribute meaning to a particular sign. Now check out this list of different words. What do you see? Now, I grew up with English as my mother tongue, and my mother only speaks English. But now I've lived for over 30 years in Sweden. Now, if my mother were to look at this list of words, she would think of completely different things than my Swedish friends see. Is it spy or spy? Spy in Swedish means to vomit. Is barn a building or a person, since the Swedish word barn means child? And what are we going to do with this word? Båtman or Batman? Now, for all my non-Swedish viewers, this is the Swedish letter Å. It's pronounced like you're from Philadelphia, talking about your daughter drinking water. Our whole language is made up of arbitrary signs like this. It's the internal relationship between the signs and the relation between the signs in a larger linguistic context that gives the signs or words meaning. Take this word, lead. It means two different things, depending on whether it's used as a noun or a verb, led or lead. There are lots of other examples, wind or wind, tear or tear, bat or bat, minute or minute, bow or bow, close or close, desert or desert, subject or subject, object or object, present or present or a present, Polish or Polish. These words get their meaning only in relation to other words within the broader framework of the English language. Now, there's a famous poem that I've loved ever since I was a kid. It's from the book Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. "'Twas brillig in the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe, all mimsy war the borogoves and the mome raths out grabe." Don't ask me what it means. It's made up of a bunch of nonsensical words. We see signs here that are used like other signs in that they appear to be used as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and so on. But since they're not part of a larger system of words, they're just balderdash, gibberish, claptrap, poppycock, and gobbledygook. When you don't recognize a word like crapulent or meretricious, there's nothing in the word itself that can help us know what it means. You have to learn the word's meaning by seeing its place in a system. But even if you don't know the word crapulent or meretricious, you understand instinctively that they're adjectives that are used to describe something. Once the relation between the signified and the signifier has been established, an individual person can't just up and change it. Now, when my son was little, he decided that a fire truck should be called a Zambuja. I tried to explain to him that if he wanted to call a fire truck a Zambuja, that's fine, but that nobody except for our immediate family would know what he was talking about. That is, not until he succeeded in convincing all the fire brigades in Sweden to start calling their trucks Zambujas. Yet that could happen as a theoretical possibility. Just imagine if this video goes viral. Like and subscribe, ping! And fire departments all over the English-speaking world start calling their trucks Zambujas. That's what happens when we get new words in our language. Think back 20 years ago, words like manspreading and Brexit didn't mean anything at all. Actually, since I don't live in America, I'm still trying to figure out what skibbity is supposed to mean, but I guess that's a different problem. Someone came up with these signs, and a lot of other people sensed that, it was a good way to signify a certain phenomenon. Languages are dynamic and go through a continual process of change. Now, Saussure was no relativist, but his theories were later developed by other scholars. They argued that since our entire language is made up of arbitrary signs, all our perceptions of reality are also conveyed by arbitrary languages consisting of arbitrary signs. We have no unmediated or immediate ideas about reality. Our experiences of the world around us are conveyed and filtered by our language. That's why we don't remember anything that happened to us before we were, around 3 years old. We lacked the language skills to process our experiences of reality at that time. Relativists therefore argue that there are no objective facts, since truth and falsehood are properties that we attribute to certain propositions, which in turn consist of arbitrary signs. Meaning and even the value of a proposition depends on the linguistic context that produces that proposition. Now, these linguistic contexts are not limited to normal languages like Swedish or English. Relativists argue that there are countless different groups in society that each have their own language games, or their ways of using language based on their personal experience, and their values, and their ideology. So if language is just an arbitrary construct that people and groups have invented, why can't truth also be an arbitrary construct, since our ideas about truth are conveyed by propositions consisting of arbitrary signs? Now, this is why postmodern relativists believe that different groups in society, whether we're talking about Marxists or Christians or feminists or members of the LGBTQ community or people with disabilities or Black Americans or indigenous peoples, no matter what, all have their own truth, even though these different truths are often mutually exclusive. Since people no longer believe in an absolute truth, there is instead a general skepticism and even suspicion towards anyone who claims to know the truth. The result is that people can no longer have a meaningful conversation with people who do not play the same language game as themselves. This in turn contributes to the extreme polarization that now characterizes much of our Western culture. When there's no longer any absolute truth, it becomes pointless to try and convince an opponent with arguments and with logic. All that remains is propaganda and power games. Those who have the power to trumpet their truth silence all other voices through deplatforming and cancel culture. So what are we to make of all this? It's true that human knowledge takes place within a specific context. We are not disembodied spirits living in a platonic world of ideas, but real human beings made of flesh and blood living in specific contexts in time and space. Some postmodern thinkers start with this fairly uncontroversial observation and end up with a relativism where context determines what is true, good, and right. This is done in several ways. By deconstructing a text. This is done by subjecting each text to questions about who is manipulating whom and for what ideological purpose. And by prioritizing voices with more intersectionality points. In other words, people who belong to various historically marginalized groups are seen to have a greater right to express themselves than people who have traditionally enjoyed and even abused power, status, and privilege. So a black trans woman with a disability has a greater authority than an educated white cisgender heterosexual man from the middle class. It's true that our contexts at least partially set limits on what we can know to be true. A person born blind does not understand the difference between red and blue. However, the problem arises when one takes an illegitimate leap from epistemology to metaphysics by claiming that context also determines what is true. According to relativism, it is not only true that a blind person doesn't understand the difference between red and blue, there is no actual difference between red and blue at all. Another problem with this form of relativism is that it is rarely applied to natural science. When you are diagnosed with cancer, you do not say to the doctor, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Either you have cancer or you don't. Think of it this way. You submit an article to a peer-reviewed journal such as Nature, Science, or the British Journal of Medicine. But the article is rejected by a reviewer because your conclusions are not supported by your experiments or because of methodological problems arising from your application of a postmodern theory of interpretation to empirical data. It's not enough to say that this is true for me, even if it's not true for the reviewer. Postmodern relativism presupposes an unhealthy gap between empirical, verifiable knowledge and theories that have no basis in any external reality. And ultimately, this form of postmodern relativism becomes self-destructive. Relativism says that everyone is entitled to their own truth. If that's true, then I am also entitled to my truth. And if my truth says that there is an absolute truth that applies to all people at all times, then the relativist has a problem. They can either acknowledge that I'm right, that there is an absolute truth that applies to all people at all times, but in that case, relativism falls as untrue. The other alternative is that the relativist can say that I cannot have my truth with a claim to absolute truth, but in that case, relativism ceases to be relativistic and begins to make its own claims to absolute truth. Whichever way you slice it, relativism falls. So when someone says that there is no absolute truth or that all groups have their own truth, you can ask some clarifying questions. Is this true or just your opinion? If this is true for you, but not true for me, then why should I care about it? And if it is not objectively true, then what kind of propaganda is this? How are you trying to manipulate me, and for what political or ideological purpose? Nobel Prize winner Nadine Gordimer says, "Truth isn't always beautiful, but the hunger for it is."